In the dead of night, under the flickering streetlights of a small American town, a routine traffic stop turned into a chilling conspiracy. A black woman, pulled over for no reason, found herself ensnared in a web of lies spun by corrupt cops who thought they were untouchable. But they didn't know one crucial detail. She was no ordinary woman. She held secrets that could bring their world crashing down. What unfolds is a heart-pounding tale of betrayal, courage, and a truth so explosive it will leave you questioning who really holds power in the shadows. Stick around until the end. You won't believe the twist that changes everything. The air was heavy with the scent of rain in Crestwood, Ohio, a small town nestled in the heart of the Midwest, where the pace of life was slow and the community prided itself on its tight-knit bonds. But beneath the surface of polite smiles and neighborly waves, a darker undercurrent simmered. Crestwood was a town of secrets where power was held by a few, and those who questioned it often paid a steep price. It was just past 1 a.m. on a chilly autumn night, and the streets were deserted, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the pavement. Street lights flickered intermittently, casting long, eerie shadows across the empty roads, their faint buzz echoing in the stillness. Behind the wheel of her silver sedan, Maya Ellison drove with a quiet intensity. Her dark eyes scanned the road ahead, her hands steady on the wheel. At 36, Maya was a seasoned covert operative for the Department of Homeland Security, a woman who had spent over a decade navigating the murky waters of espionage and corruption. Her latest assignment had brought her to Crestwood, a seemingly unremarkable town that hid a sprawling network of corruption. For months, she had been gathering evidence, encrypted files, wiretapped conversations, and financial records that pointed to a conspiracy reaching far beyond the local police department. Tonight, she was on her way to a safe house, the final pieces of her investigation securely stored in a cloud server accessible only by her team. Maya's instincts, sharpened by years in the field, were on high alert. She slowed as she approached a quiet intersection, her headlights catching the reflective surface of a stop sign. She came to a full stop, her hands resting lightly on the wheel, her breathing steady. The rain fell harder now, a steady drumbeat against the roof of her car, amplifying the silence of the night. She glanced at her rearview mirror, the darkness behind her unbroken. But there was a prickle at the back of her neck, a subtle warning she'd learned never to ignore. Something was off. She turned right onto Maple Street, the sedan's tires crunching softly against the wet pavement, the sound swallowed by the rain. Moments later, blue and red lights erupted behind her, their harsh glow slicing through the misty night like a blade. A siren wailed, sharp and jarring, shattering the stillness with its piercing cry. Maya's pulse didn't quicken. She was trained for moments like this, trained to stay calm when the world turned hostile. She eased her car to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and reached for her glove compartment. Her movements were deliberate, precise, as she pulled out her driver's license and registration. She knew the risks of being a black woman in a small town like Crestwood, where bias often hid behind badges. She wasn't about to give anyone an excuse to escalate. The squad car stopped just behind her, its lights still flashing, painting the wet pavement in alternating shades of blue and red. Two officers stepped out, their silhouettes stark against the glare. The taller one, broad-shouldered with a swagger in his step, approached her window first. His partner, leaner and more guarded, hung back, his hand resting on his holster. Maya noted their badges as they drew closer, Officer Derek Holt and Officer Paul Grayson, both of the Crestwood Police Department. "Evening, ma'am," Holt said, his voice smooth but laced with condescension. He leaned down, shining a flashlight into her car, the beam sweeping across her face and the interior momentarily blinding her. "You know why we pulled you over?" Maya met his gaze, her expression neutral but unyielding. "No, officer," she replied, her tone even. "I stopped at the sign, and I wasn't speeding." Holt's lips curled into a faint smirk, the kind that suggested he was used to being in control. "That's not what I saw. You rolled through that stop sign back there. That's a violation." Maya's eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her composure. She knew the stop sign was a lie. She'd stopped fully, her training ensuring she never gave anyone a reason to question her. "I'm certain I stopped, officer," she said, her voice firm but polite. Holt's smirk widened, his tone hardening. "License and registration." Maya handed over the documents, her movements slow and deliberate to avoid any misinterpretation. Holt examined them, his eyes lingering on her license as if searching for something to exploit. "Crestwood address?" he muttered, almost to himself, then louder. "You from around here?" "Yes," Maya replied, keeping her answer short. She could sense the shift in his demeanor, the way his questions were probing, testing. Holt wasn't just fishing for a violation, he was looking for leverage. Grayson stepped closer to the rear of her car, his movements deliberate. "Holt, you might want to check this out," he called, his voice low but calculated. Holt handed Maya's documents back with a curt nod. "Stay in the car," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. He joined Grayson at the trunk of her sedan, and Maya watched them through her side mirror. Grayson was pointing at something, his gestures animated, his voice too low for her to hear over the rain. The two exchanged a glance, a look that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't fear. Maya didn't scare easily. It was recognition. This wasn't a random stop. This was a setup, and she was the target. Holt returned to her window, his expression now cold and accusing. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Maya tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but probing. "May I ask why?" "We have reason to believe you're carrying illegal substances," Holt said, his words clipped, rehearsed. "We need to search your vehicle." Maya's jaw tightened, her mind racing. "Illegal substances?" she repeated, her tone measured. "I think you've made a mistake." "We'll see about that," Holt said, gesturing for her to exit. Grayson was already at the trunk, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. Maya stepped out of the car, her movements unhurried, her hands visible at her sides. The rain was cold against her skin, soaking through her jacket as she stood tall, her presence commanding despite the situation. Grayson lifted the trunk with a creak, the sound sharp in the quiet night, and pointed to a small, unmarked duffel bag sitting conspicuously near the edge. "Well, look at that," Grayson said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "What do we have here?" Maya's eyes flicked to the bag, then back to the officers. Her face remained impassive, but her mind was working at lightning speed. That bag wasn't hers. She'd checked her car before leaving the safe house, every inch of it. She was meticulous, a habit born from years of high-stakes missions where a single oversight could mean death. This was planted, and they knew it. Holt stepped closer, his smirk returning. "Care to explain this?" Maya's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, a calculated gesture that unnerved both officers for a split second. "I'll save my explanations for the right audience," she said, her voice steady, carrying a quiet intensity that hinted at the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. Holt chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, you'll get your chance. You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." As Grayson moved to cuff her, the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked sharply against her wrist, a sound that echoed in the rain-soaked night. Maya didn't resist. She kept her gaze locked on Holt, her eyes conveying a silent warning. "You're making a mistake," she said softly, her words carrying a weight that made Grayson hesitate for a fraction of a second. "We'll see who's mistaken," Holt said, leading her to the squad car. "Let's see how you hold up in front of a judge. What do you think? Is Maya in over her head, or does she have a plan to turn the tables? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear your thoughts." The drive to the Crestwood police station was shrouded in a tense silence. The only sounds the hum of the engine, the occasional crackle of the police radio, and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows. Maya sat in the back seat, her hands cuffed behind her, her expression unreadable. The town's quiet streets rolled by, the rain now a steady drizzle, blurring the world outside. Her mind, however, was sharp, piecing together the puzzle. This wasn't just about her, the files she carried, the corruption she was uncovering. It all pointed to a network that included Holt and Grayson. They weren't acting alone. Someone higher up was pulling the strings, someone with enough power to orchestrate this frame-up. Maya needed to survive long enough to expose them. Inside the station, the atmosphere was oppressive. The building was a squat, gray structure, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh, flickering glow on the chipped linoleum floors. The walls were lined with faded posters about community safety, a cruel irony given the corruption festering within. The night shift was sparse, with a handful of officers lounging behind desks, their conversations hushed as Holt and Grayson led Maya inside. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant, a scent that clung to the back of her throat, mingling with the faint tang of mildew. "Big catch tonight," Holt announced, his voice loud enough to draw attention, echoing off the concrete walls. He tossed the duffel bag onto the counter with a flourish, the zipper half open to reveal plastic bags of white powder inside. The other officers glanced up, their interest piqued, but there was no surprise in their eyes, only a quiet acceptance, as if this were routine. Grayson smirked, leaning against the counter, his posture casual, but his eyes sharp. "Caught her with enough to lock her up for years," he said, his tone brimming with satisfaction. Maya remained silent, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of a predator. She noted the security cameras, old models, their lenses scratched and likely unreliable, the layout of the desks, and the subtle glances exchanged among the officers. This was a station built on loyalty, not to the law, but to each other. She was in hostile territory, but she'd been in worse. Her training had prepared her for moments like this, where every detail could mean the difference between survival and failure. She memorized the positions of the cameras, the exits, the officers' routines. Knowledge was power, and she was gathering it with every passing second. They led her to a processing area where Holt removed her cuffs with a metallic clank that reverberated through the small room. He gestured to the fingerprinting station, his movements rough. A young officer, barely out of his 20s, stood behind the counter. His badge read Officer Ethan Caldwell. Unlike the others, his eyes held a flicker of unease as he glanced at Maya. There was a softness to his features, a hesitancy that suggested he hadn't yet been fully indoctrinated into the station's culture of corruption. "Name?" Caldwell asked, his voice softer than the others, almost apologetic as he avoided her gaze. "Maya Ellison," she replied, her tone calm, her voice steady, despite the tension in the room. "Occupation?" Maya paused for a fraction of a second, choosing her words carefully. "Security consultant," she said, a title vague enough to avoid scrutiny, but close enough to the truth to pass muster. Caldwell nodded, typing her information into the system. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard as if he sensed something wasn't right. He glanced at her again, his eyes lingering on her composed expression, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Holt and Grayson, meanwhile, stood nearby, their laughter grating as they recounted the arrest to another officer, their voices bouncing off the walls. Maya's voice cut through their banter like a blade. "You seem awfully proud of yourselves," she said, her tone even but pointed, her words a quiet challenge that silenced the room for a moment. Holt's laughter faltered, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face her. "You've got a mouth on you," he said, his tone darkening, his jaw tightening. "We'll see how tough you are after a night in lockup." Maya's cell was a cold concrete box, its metal bench bolted to the wall, the surface icy against her back. The bars cast long shadows across the floor, and the hum of the overhead lights was a constant drone, punctuated by the occasional drip of water from a leaking pipe in the corner. She sat upright, her posture composed, her mind sharp despite the late hour. Holt lingered outside her cell, his arms crossed, studying her like a predator sizing up prey. "You don't look like the type to mess with this stuff," he said, his tone almost conversational, but there was a taunting edge to it, his breath visible in the chilly air. "But the evidence doesn't lie. Maybe you'll get lucky with a sympathetic judge." Maya tilted her head, her gaze piercing, her dark eyes reflecting the dim light like polished obsidian. "Or maybe the truth will come out," she said, her voice low but laced with conviction. Her words weren't a plea. They were a promise, one that made Holt shift uncomfortably, his smirk faltering for a split second. He scoffed, but the sound was forced, his confidence cracking under her unyielding stare. "Keep dreaming," he muttered before walking away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, each step a little quicker than the last. Maya leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly, the cold concrete biting into her shoulders. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to center herself. In her mind, she saw her younger brother Marcus, his face lit up with a boyish grin as they played basketball in their old neighborhood in Detroit. That was 10 years ago, before he was arrested on a trumped-up charge by a corrupt cop, before he spent 3 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. It was Marcus's story that had driven Maya to this work, a promise she'd made to herself as she watched him walk out of the prison gates, a shadow of the boy he'd been. She'd vowed to never let another innocent person suffer like he had. That vow was her anchor now, a fire in her chest that kept her focused even in the darkest moments. She wasn't here to play their game. She was here to end it. The files she'd been carrying were safe, hidden in a secure cloud server accessible only by her team. But she needed to act fast. The longer she stayed in custody, the more time her enemies had to cover their tracks. She knew her team was already mobilizing. The tracker in her watch, activated during the arrest, had sent a signal the moment she was cuffed. Her absence would raise alarms, and her team would come for her. But she wasn't content to sit idly by. She needed to sow discord, to find the weak link in this station's chain of loyalty. That weak link, she suspected, was Officer Caldwell. His hesitation during processing, the way his eyes avoided hers, it was the mark of someone not yet fully corrupted by the station's culture. She could see the conflict in him, the flicker of doubt that suggested he still had a conscience. She would use that. But for now, she waited, her patience a weapon forged through years of high-stakes missions. The cell was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the building settling and the faint drip of water, each sound amplified in the stillness. In the break room, Holt and Grayson sat with mugs of coffee, their laughter filling the small space. The room was cramped, its walls lined with peeling paint and a bulletin board covered in outdated notices. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, casting a harsh light on their faces, highlighting the tension in their expressions. "She thinks she's untouchable," Grayson said, shaking his head, his voice tinged with unease. "Did you see how calm she was? Like she's got some ace up her sleeve." "She's bluffing," Holt replied, but his tone lacked certainty, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. He took a sip of his coffee, the bitter taste doing little to ease the unease creeping into his chest. "We've got the bag, the report, everything. She's going down." Grayson leaned forward, lowering his voice, his eyes darting toward the door. "What if she's connected? That security consultant bit sounds like a cover. What if she's some kind of fed?" Holt's eyes darkened, his grip tightening on his mug, the ceramic creaking under the pressure. "Doesn't matter. We've got friends in high places. No one's digging into this." But Grayson wasn't convinced. He'd seen the way Maya carried herself, the quiet confidence that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. "I don't know, man," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something about her, it's not right." Holt waved him off, but the seed of doubt had been planted. He couldn't shake the feeling that they'd bitten off more than they could chew. Unbeknownst to them, Caldwell lingered just outside the break room, his coffee cup trembling in his hand. He'd overheard enough to know something was wrong. The arrest felt too clean, too convenient. And Maya's demeanor, she wasn't like the usual suspects he'd processed. She was too composed, too confident. It gnawed at him, a doubt he couldn't shake. He'd joined the force to make a difference, to protect his community. But what he'd seen in his 6 months at the Crestwood station had shaken that idealism. The late-night arrests, the whispered conversations, the way certain cases were handled, it all pointed to something rotten at the core of the department. And now, with Maya's arrest, that rot was staring him in the face. Caldwell returned to his desk, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced at the surveillance monitor, the grainy feed showing Maya sitting in her cell, her posture as composed as ever. She didn't look like a criminal. She looked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. He pulled up her file on his computer, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through the sparse details. "Security consultant," the file read, but there were gaps in her employment history, red flags that suggested she was more than she seemed. And the arrest report? It was too perfect, too scripted. He'd seen Holt and Grayson's reports before, and they always followed the same pattern. minor violations escalating to major charges, often targeting people who couldn't fight back. Caldwell's heart pounded as he opened the station's digital archives, searching for past cases tied to Holt and Grayson. What he found made his stomach churn. Dozens of arrests, nearly identical to Maya's. Traffic stops turned drug busts, most targeting Black or Latino drivers. The conviction rates were high, but the evidence was often flimsy, the narratives cookie-cutter. He minimized the screen, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. This wasn't just bad policing, it was a pattern, a system, and he was part of it. Dawn broke over Crestwood, the first rays of light filtering through the cell's narrow window, casting a pale glow across the concrete floor. The sky was a pale gray, heavy with the promise of more rain. Maya hadn't moved, her posture as composed as ever. The station stirred to life, the day shift arriving with the clatter of footsteps and the hum of conversation, their voices muffled through the thick walls. She listened carefully, cataloging the voices, the routines, her mind a steel trap for every detail. A loud buzz signaled the cell block door opening, the sound harsh against the quiet morning. Grayson appeared, his smirk firmly in place, his boots thudding against the floor. "Morning, Princess," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Hope you enjoyed the accommodations. You've got a hearing this afternoon, but don't get your hopes up. The judge isn't a fan of drug runners." Maya met his gaze, her expression unreadable, her dark eyes boring into him. "Good to know," she said softly, her voice carrying an edge that made Grayson shift uncomfortably, his smirk faltering for a split second. She could see the cracks in his facade, the way his confidence wavered under her unyielding stare. He was nervous, and she intended to exploit that. Grayson cleared his throat and stepped back, his movements jerky. "Breakfast is coming," he muttered before walking away, his steps quicker than necessary, his shadow disappearing down the hall. Maya leaned back against the wall, her mind already moving to the next step. Grayson's bravado was a mask, and she could see it slipping. All she needed was time and a little pressure. She knew her team was close, their presence a quiet reassurance in the back of her mind. But she needed to keep the pressure on, to break the station's wall of silence. Caldwell was the key, and she intended to push him until he broke. At the front desk, Caldwell sat at his computer, his eyes darting to the holding cell monitors. Maya's image stared back at him, her stillness unnerving, her presence a silent challenge. He'd processed countless arrests, but none had left him this unsettled. Her file was still open on his screen, and the more he read, the more his unease grew. The gaps in her history, the vague job title, it all pointed to something bigger. And the arrest report, it was too perfect, too scripted. He knew Holt and Grayson's tactics, had seen them in action too many times to count, but this time it felt different. Maya wasn't just another victim, she was a threat, and they knew it. Caldwell's fingers hovered over his keyboard, his palms sweaty against the keys. He knew the risks of questioning senior officers. He was a rookie, barely 6 months on the job, and the station's unspoken code was clear: loyalty above all else. But the doubt in his chest was growing, a weight he couldn't ignore. He glanced toward the break room where Holt and Grayson were laughing over donuts, their arrogance grating against his conscience. He couldn't keep looking the other way, not this time. Against his better judgment, Caldwell pulled up the station's digital archives again, digging deeper into Holt and Grayson's past cases. The more he read, the more his stomach churned. There were dozens of cases, stretching back years, all following the same pattern: fabricated charges, planted evidence, and a clear bias against people of color. He found a case from 2 years ago, a young black man named Jamal Carter, arrested for possession after a routine traffic stop. The evidence was flimsy, but Jamal had been convicted, sentenced to 5 years. Caldwell remembered hearing about the case, the way Holt had bragged about cleaning up the streets. But now, seeing it in black and white, Caldwell felt sick. Jamal had been innocent, just like Maya. Caldwell's hands trembled as he closed the file, his breath ragged. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't be part of a system that destroyed lives for the sake of power and control. But what could he do? If he spoke up, he'd be ostracized, his career over before it even began. He'd seen what happened to officers who crossed the line, transferred to desk jobs, harassed until they quit, or worse. But the alternative was worse. If he stayed silent, he'd be complicit, another cog in a machine that thrived on injustice. What would you do in Caldwell's shoes? Would you risk everything to do the right thing, or stay silent to protect yourself? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. In her cell, Maya sensed the shift in the station's rhythm. The officers' voices were quieter now, their movements more cautious, their footsteps echoing with a nervous energy. She knew her team was close, their presence a quiet reassurance. But she needed to push Caldwell further to break the station's wall of silence. Caldwell's footsteps echoed down the hall, slow and uncertain, each step heavy with the weight of his decision. He stopped outside her cell, his hands fidgeting at his sides, his uniform slightly wrinkled from a sleepless night. "Miss Ellison," he said, his voice low, "I need to ask you something." Maya looked up, her dark eyes sharp and assessing, reading the conflict in his posture. "Go ahead, Officer Caldwell." He swallowed hard, glancing down the hallway to ensure they were alone, the shadows playing across his tense face. "Did you consent to the search of your car? The report says you did, but—" His voice trailed off, his doubt palpable, his hands clenching into fists. Maya tilted her head, studying him, her gaze steady and unyielding. "What do you think?" she asked, her tone calm but piercing, cutting through his hesitation like a knife. Caldwell's face flushed, his voice trembling. "I'm just doing my job," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him, his eyes darting away from hers. "That's what they're counting on," Maya replied, her gaze unwavering, her voice a quiet force. "Holt and Grayson, they rely on people like you to stay silent, to follow orders. But you see it, don't you? The lies, the setup. You know this isn't right." Caldwell stepped back, his hands trembling, his breath shallow. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his eyes betrayed him, wide with guilt and fear. He turned and walked away, his steps hurried, but Maya knew she'd planted a seed. It was only a matter of time. In a nondescript office building on the outskirts of Crestwood, a black SUV pulled into a secure lot, its tires crunching against the gravel. Inside, a woman in a tailored suit stepped out, her movements precise, her heels clicking against the pavement. Agent Lauren Carter, a veteran of Homeland Security, checked her phone, her expression unreadable, her sharp features illuminated by the pale morning light. The signal from Maya's tracker had come through hours ago, and her team was ready to move. She was a woman in her late 40s, with a sharp mind and a reputation for getting results. She'd worked with Maya for years, and she knew the operative's capabilities. If Maya was in trouble, it was serious. "Status?" Carter asked, addressing the two agents flanking her, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Station's under surveillance," one replied, a young man named Agent Ramirez, his tone professional. "We've got eyes on the holding cells in the front desk. The rookie, Caldwell. He's showing signs of cracking." Carter nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line, her mind already calculating the next move. "Good. We wait for Maya's signal, but we prep for extraction. This goes deeper than Holt and Grayson. We need to take down the whole network." Inside a secure operations room, monitors displayed live feeds from the Crestwood station, the screens casting a blue glow across the room. One showed Maya in her cell, her posture calm but alert, her presence a quiet storm. Another captured Caldwell at his desk, his face etched with conflict, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. Carter watched the screens, her mind calculating every possible outcome. "She's playing them like a chessboard," she said, a faint smile crossing her lips, her voice tinged with admiration. "Let's make sure she has the board she needs." Carter turned to her tech agent, a woman named Agent Harper, her fingers already flying across her keyboard. "What do we have on the station's leadership?" Harper's screen lit up with files, her voice steady as she reported. "The chief of police, Ronald Bennett. He's got ties to a local businessman, Victor Langston. Langston's been funding Bennett's campaigns for years, and there's evidence of money laundering through Langston's construction company. We think Holt and Grayson are on Langston's payroll, framing people to keep the town under control." Carter's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing. "So Bennett's the puppet, and Langston's the puppet master. We need to tie them to Maya's arrest." "We're working on it," Harper said, her fingers still moving, "but we need more time, and Maya's signal." Carter nodded, her eyes returning to the monitor, her trust in Maya unwavering. They'd been through too many missions together to doubt each other now. But the stakes were high, and the clock was ticking. Back at the station, Holt leaned back in the break room, his coffee cold on the table, the bitter smell mingling with the stale air. The room was quiet now, the earlier laughter replaced by a tense silence. "You noticed Caldwell today?" he said to Grayson, his voice low, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "Kid's been acting squirrely." Grayson shrugged, but his eyes narrowed, his posture tense. "Probably just nervous. First big arrest, you know how rookies get." "Let's hope that's all it is," Holt said, his tone darkening, his jaw tight. "Last thing we need is him poking around." Grayson shifted uncomfortably, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What about Langston? If this blows up, he's not going to be happy." Holt's face hardened, his eyes cold. "Langston will handle it. He always does. But we need to make sure this doesn't blow up. Keep an eye on Caldwell." As the morning wore on, the tension in the station grew palpable, the air thick with unspoken fear. Maya could feel it, the subtle shift in the air, the way the officers' laughter sounded forced, their footsteps echoing with a nervous rhythm. She knew her team was close, their presence a quiet reassurance. But she needed to push Caldwell further to break the station's wall of silence. Caldwell's footsteps returned, slower this time, each step heavy with the weight of his decision. He stopped outside her cell, his expression tormented, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "You said they're counting on me," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What did you mean?" Maya's gaze was steady, her voice soft but commanding, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You know what I mean, Ethan. You've seen the patterns, the arrests, the evidence, the people they target. You can keep pretending it's just your job, or you can do something about it. The choice is yours." Caldwell stared at her, his jaw tight, his hands clenching into fists. "If I say something, I'm done here. My career, my life, it's over." "Is that what you're afraid of?" Maya asked, her voice cutting through his defenses, her words sharp and unyielding. "Losing your job, or living with the knowledge that you let people like Holt and Grayson destroy lives? You've seen the files, haven't you? You know what they've done." Caldwell's eyes widened, his breath catching, his voice trembling. "How do you—" "I see more than you think," Maya said, her tone calm but unyielding, her gaze piercing. "I know what it's like to feel trapped, to think you don't have a choice. But you do, Ethan. You always have a choice." Caldwell walked away, but his shoulders were slumped, his resolve fraying, his footsteps echoing with a hollow sound. Back at his desk, he stared at his computer, the list of Holt and Grayson's cases still open. His mind flashed back to Jamal Carter, the young man whose life had been ruined by a false arrest. He thought of his own dreams, the reason he'd joined the force, to protect, to serve, to make a difference. But what difference had he made? He'd stood by, watched as Holt and Grayson targeted the vulnerable, as the station became a tool for oppression rather than justice. He couldn't do it anymore. Caldwell's hands trembled as he opened a secure email channel, his heart racing, his breath shallow. He typed a message, each keystroke a rebellion against the system he'd once trusted. "To whom it may concern, I have evidence of misconduct at the Crestwood Police Department. Please investigate." He attached the case files and hit send, the sound of the click echoing in his ears, his breath catching as the message vanished into the ether. He didn't know who would receive it or if they'd even care, but he couldn't stay silent any longer. What do you think Caldwell's email will lead to? Will it be the key to bringing down the corruption, or will it put him in even more danger? Share your predictions in the comments. I can't wait to see what you think. In the break room, Holt's phone buzzed, the sound sharp and jarring in the tense silence. He glanced at the screen, his face paling, his hands trembling as he read the message. "We've got a problem," he said to Grayson, his voice low, his eyes wide with panic. "Someone's talking." Grayson's smirk vanished, his face hardening, his hands clenching into fists. "Caldwell?" "Maybe," Holt said, his tone grim, his mind racing. "We need to shut this down, now." Grayson nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. "I'll take care of him." But it was too late. Caldwell's email had already reached its destination, intercepted by Carter's team. The message was the final piece they needed to move in. That afternoon, as the station hummed with activity, 3 black SUVs pulled into the lot, their engines rumbling ominously. The door to the station burst open with a sound like thunder, the heavy wood slamming against the wall, and a rush of cool air swept through the room. Agent Carter stepped inside, her badge gleaming in the fluorescent light. Her tailored suit a stark contrast to the station's worn interior. She was flanked by 4 agents, their movements synchronized, their presence commanding, like avenging angels emerging from the shadows. The front desk fell silent, the officers' conversations dying as they registered the federal presence, their faces paling with fear. Caldwell froze at his desk, his heart pounding, his hands trembling. He knew his email had triggered this, but the reality was overwhelming, the weight of his decision crashing down on him. Carter approached the desk sergeant, her voice calm but authoritative, cutting through the silence like a blade. "We're with Homeland Security. We need access to your records and holding cells. Now." The sergeant hesitated, his hand hovering over his radio, his eyes darting nervously. "What's this about?" he asked, his tone wary, his voice trembling slightly. "Federal investigation," Carter replied, her voice like steel, her gaze unyielding. "We have evidence of systemic corruption in this department. Cooperate, or we'll do this the hard way." The sergeant relented, gesturing for them to follow, his movements jerky, his face pale. Caldwell watched, his palms sweating, as Holt and Grayson emerged from the break room. Their faces were grim, their earlier arrogance replaced by fear, their eyes wide with panic. Holt's eyes locked onto Caldwell, and the rookie looked away, his guilt written across his face, his heart pounding in his chest. Carter's team set up in an interrogation room, their tech agents plugging into the station's network, their laptops humming to life. Lines of code and case files scrolled across their screens, revealing a web of falsified reports, planted evidence, and targeted arrests. Carter stood by, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable, her mind calculating every move. "This is bigger than we thought," she said to Harper, her voice low, her eyes narrowing. "Holt and Grayson are just the tip of the iceberg." Harper nodded, pulling up a financial record, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "We've got a money trail. Payments from Langston's company to Holt and Grayson, funneled through offshore accounts. And there's more. Bennett's been signing off on their reports, burying complaints." Carter's jaw tightened, her eyes flashing with determination. "So Bennett's in on it. We need to tie this to Langston." "We're getting there," Harper said, her voice steady. "But we need the physical evidence, the bag they planted on Maya." In her cell, Maya felt the shift, the air crackling with tension. The station's rhythm had changed, the officers' voices now hushed, their movements frantic, their footsteps echoing with a nervous energy. She knew her team had arrived. She shifted on the bench, her hands resting calmly in her lap, the cuffs having left faint marks on her wrists, a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. Her focus was on the end game, her mind sharp and unyielding. Holt paced in the break room, his coffee forgotten, the bitter smell lingering in the air. "They're here for her," he said to Grayson, his voice tight, his hands trembling. "We need to get rid of that bag." "Too late," Grayson muttered, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. "They've got access to everything if they find the tapes." "They won't," Holt snapped, his voice sharp, his jaw tight. "We've got people who'll make sure of it." But their confidence was crumbling, their voices tinged with desperation. Carter's team was thorough, pulling security footage, cross-referencing reports, and interviewing officers. The station's wall of loyalty was cracking, and Caldwell's email had given them the leverage they needed. An agent appeared at Maya's cell, the door buzzing open with a harsh metallic sound that echoed through the hall. "Miss Ellison," he said, his tone respectful, his posture straight, "you're free to go." Maya stood, her movements smooth and deliberate, the faint ache in her shoulders a reminder of the long night. She stepped out of the cell, the hallway brighter now, the weight of the station lifting, the air fresher with the promise of freedom. As she passed Caldwell's desk, their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came, his throat tight with emotion. She stopped, turning to face him, her presence a quiet force. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying a depth of gratitude that made Caldwell's chest tighten, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He nodded, his hands gripping his desk, his knuckles white. I couldn't let it go on," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, his words heavy with the weight of his choice. "You did the right thing," Maya said, her tone firm but kind. "That's more than most." The interrogation room was a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls. Holt and Grayson sat across from Carter, their postures rigid, their faces pale, beads of sweat glistening on their foreheads. Carter laid out a stack of evidence, security footage showing them planting the bag, audio recordings of their conversations, and a trail of falsified reports stretching back years, each piece a nail in their coffin. "Let's make this simple," Carter said, her voice like steel, her gaze unyielding, her presence commanding the room. "You can cooperate, or you can go down with the ship. But make no mistake, this department is done." Holt tried to bluff, his voice shaking, his hands trembling on the table. "You've got nothing. That footage could mean anything." Carter slid a photo across the table, a still from the station's cameras showing Holt slipping the bag into Maya's trunk, the timestamp clear and damning. "This means everything," she said, her tone cold, her eyes narrowing, "and we have more. Your friends in high places, they're cutting you loose." Grayson buried his face in his hands, his bravado gone, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Holt's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him, his face ashen. The truth was inescapable, the weight of their crimes crushing them. In the bullpen, Caldwell watched as Holt and Grayson were led out in handcuffs, the metallic clank of the cuffs echoing through the room, a sound that marked the end of their reign. Their heads were bowed, their careers in ruins, their arrogance replaced by shame. The station buzzed with shock, officers whispering, some avoiding Caldwell's gaze, others nodding in quiet respect. He'd crossed a line, but he'd done it for the right reasons, his heart lighter, despite the uncertainty ahead. Carter approached Maya at the station's entrance, her expression softening, a rare smile crossing her lips. "You played this perfectly," she said, her voice warm, her admiration clear. "We've got enough to take down the whole network." Maya nodded, her composure unbroken, her dark eyes reflecting the light of the setting sun. "Make sure it doesn't end here. There are more like them out there." "It won't," Carter promised, her tone firm, her resolve unwavering. "We're just getting started." As Maya stepped outside, the cool air hit her face, a reminder of freedom, the scent of rain still lingering in the air. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. The weight of the mission lifted, replaced by a quiet satisfaction, a warmth in her chest. She'd exposed a cancer in Crestwood, but the fight wasn't over. There were always more battles to come. The fallout was swift and brutal. Holt and Grayson's arrests dominated the news, their faces splashed across every screen, their mugshots a stark reminder of their fall. "Corruption uncovered, Homeland Security busts Crestwood cops," read one headline, the words bold and unyielding. The charges against Maya were dropped, and dozens of cases tied to Holt and Grayson were reopened, each one a step toward justice. The station faced a reckoning with internal investigations exposing more officers involved in the scheme. Chief Bennett resigned in disgrace, his career in tatters, and Victor Langston was arrested a week later, his empire crumbling under the weight of the evidence, his mansion raided in a dramatic dawn operation. Crestwood itself was shaken to its core, the town's sense of community fractured by the scandal. The town had always prided itself on its unity, but the revelations exposed the cracks beneath the surface, the pain of those who'd been silenced for too long. Protests erupted outside the station, led by community leaders demanding reform, their voices a powerful chorus in the crisp autumn air. Among them was Jamal Carter, the young man whose life had been ruined by Holt and Grayson's corruption. He'd been released from prison after his case was overturned, and now he stood at the forefront of the movement, his voice a powerful call for change, his presence a symbol of resilience. A local journalist, Sarah Mitchell, had been following the story from the beginning, her articles a beacon of truth in the darkness. She'd been tipped off by an anonymous source, later revealed to be Caldwell, and her reporting had kept the pressure on the department, her words a catalyst for change. Now, with the arrests making national news, Sarah sat down with Jamal for an interview, his story reaching millions, his voice steady and unyielding. "I lost 2 years of my life," Jamal said, his voice filled with emotion, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been hurt by a system that's supposed to protect us." Caldwell became a reluctant hero, praised by some, shunned by others. His life a whirlwind of change. He received death threats from former colleagues, their words a chilling reminder of the cost of his actions. But he also received letters of gratitude from the families of those who'd been wrongfully convicted. One letter from Jamal's mother brought tears to his eyes, her words a balm to his wounded spirit. "Thank you for giving my son his life back," it read, the handwriting shaky but filled with love. Caldwell kept that letter in his desk, a reminder of why he'd spoken out, a touchstone in the chaos. A month later, Caldwell met Maya at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, the air crisp with the scent of autumn, the leaves falling around them in shades of red and gold. The shop was a cozy little place, its walls lined with bookshelves, the air filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the soft hum of conversation. Caldwell sat across from Maya, stirring his coffee nervously, his hand still trembling slightly from the weight of the past few weeks, his uniform replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. "I didn't think you'd come," he admitted, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from his cup. Maya smiled faintly, her dark eyes warm but guarded, her presence a quiet strength. "You earned this," she said, her tone firm but kind. "You took a stand when it mattered." Caldwell looked down, his expression conflicted, his voice soft. "I keep thinking about what you said, about choices. I don't know if I'm cut out for this job anymore. After everything, I don't know if I can trust the system." Maya leaned forward, a voice firm but kind, her gaze steady. "You are," she said, her words a quiet force. "The world needs people like you, people who choose what's right, even when it's hard. The system isn't perfect, but it's people like you who can change it. Don't give up, Ethan, not now." Her words stayed with him, a beacon in the uncertainty, a light in the darkness. Caldwell nodded, a small smile breaking through his uncertainty, his eyes glistening with gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. for everything. Maya nodded, her expression softening, a rare warmth in her eyes. "Keep fighting," she said before standing to leave. As she walked out of the coffee shop, the bell above the door jingled softly, a quiet end to a moment that had changed them both, the sound fading into the crisp autumn air. For Maya, the mission was over, but the war wasn't. She returned to her apartment, a small, sparsely furnished space on the outskirts of Crestwood, the walls bare except for a single photo of her and Marcus, taken on the day he was released from prison. She packed for her next assignment, her movements efficient, her mind already shifting to the challenges ahead. A dossier sat on her table, details of a new target, a new fight. Her phone buzzed, and Carter's voice came through, her tone urgent. "Ready for the next one?" Carter asked, her voice crackling through the line. Maya's lips curved into a determined smile, her eyes fixed on the photo of her brother, a reminder of why she fought. "Always," she said, her voice steady, her resolve unyielding. But as she prepared to leave, Carter's voice dropped, a note of caution in her tone. "Maya, there's something you need to know. Langston wasn't the end of this. We've got new intel. He was taking orders from someone higher up, a senator, Maya, Senator Richard Harrow. He's been funding these operations, using towns like Crestwood to test his influence, to silence anyone who gets too close to the truth. And he knows about you." Maya's breath caught, her hand tightening around the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. Senator Harrow, a name she'd heard in whispers, a shadow in the corridors of power. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. "I understand," she said, her voice calm but laced with steel. "I'll handle it." As she stepped into the night, the door closed behind her with a soft click, the sound final but not finality. The fight for justice was endless, but Maya Ellison was built for it. And somewhere in the shadows of Crestwood, a town began to heal, reminded that truth, no matter how buried, always finds a way to rise. But the question remains, who is Senator Harrow, and what does he want with Maya? Will she take him down, or will he be her toughest challenge yet? Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for the next part of this story. In the weeks that followed, Crestwood became a symbol of change, its story echoing across the nation. Community leaders organized town halls, inviting residents to share their stories of injustice at the hands of the police. The meetings packed with voices both angry and hopeful. The air was charged with a mix of pain and determination, the town hall's wooden floors creaking under the weight of the crowd. Sarah Mitchell continued her reporting, her articles shining a light on the systemic issues that had allowed corruption to flourish, her words a beacon of truth. She interviewed Maya anonymously, referring to her only as a federal operative, and the story of a black woman who'd fought back against a corrupt system inspired millions, her courage a rallying cry. Caldwell decided to stay with the department, determined to be part of the change, his resolve strengthened by Maya's words. He enrolled in additional training, focusing on community policing and de-escalation techniques, his nights spent studying under the dim glow of a desk lamp. He also started a mentorship program for new recruits, teaching them the importance of integrity and accountability, his voice steady as he shared his story. It wasn't easy. There were still officers who viewed him with suspicion, and the scars of the scandal ran deep. But Caldwell was committed, driven by the memory of Maya's words and the gratitude of those he'd helped. his heart lighter with each step forward. Jamal Carter became an advocate, speaking at rallies and working with local organizations to push for police reform, his voice a powerful force for change. He enrolled in community college, studying criminal justice with the goal of becoming a lawyer, his textbooks scattered across his small apartment. "I want to make sure no one else goes through what I did," he told Sarah in a follow-up interview, his eyes bright with determination, his words a promise to himself and his community. His story and the story of Crestwood became a rallying cry for change across the country, a testament to the power of resilience. Maya, meanwhile, moved on to her next mission, her life a series of battles fought in the shadows, her resolve unyielding. She didn't seek recognition, didn't care for the spotlight. For her, the work was its own reward, the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd made a difference, that she'd given a voice to those who had none. But as she boarded a plane to her next destination, the hum of the engines, a steady rhythm in her ears, a small smile played on her lips. Crestwood had been a victory, a reminder that even in the darkest corners, the light of truth could shine through. Yet the shadow of Senator Harrow loomed large, a new battle on the horizon, one that would test her like never before. This is a story of courage, of standing against the tide, of a woman who refused to break and a man who found his voice. It's a reminder that no matter how deep the corruption, no matter how powerful the lies, the truth will always fight its way to the surface. If this story moved you, if it made you think, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There are more stories like this. Tales of heroes, of justice, of the battles that shape our world. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.